both on? Are you on?
I think I'm on.
We're on. Good. So you see, we've built up some rapport, and we're ready to go. Jolyon Maugham, King's Counsel, practiced at the self-employed bar, specialised in tax law from a very early stage, but not quite from right at the beginning, if I'm right. Took Queen's Counsel, took Silk in 2015, founded the Good Law Project 2017. On its website is a not-for-profit campaign organisation that uses law for a better world. You left self-employed practice pretty much to work on the Good Law Project pretty much full-time. And in 2020, the Good Law Project, I think, had no employees whatsoever. And you say in your book, in the spring, you're going to have about 50. I presume you've now got about 50.
We've got about 50.
You say in the book that you exercise an important public function in trying to cause, in as much as our constitution enables it, a government with little respect for the rule of law to act within it nonetheless. And you've got a book, and we're looking at it here. Just setting off on a book tour.
I am. I'm going to swan around the country for 6 months pretending to be a public intellectual, and hopefully I'll enjoy it and hopefully it'll be well received, but I don't yet know.
Because you've always been more than just a tax lawyer, so going back a long time before the Good Law Project, I know you were involved with one organisation, Gingerbread, a charity which works in relation to poverty for single-parent families. Have you always known that public interest litigation would one day be the focus of your work?
No. It mostly came about because in about 2013, when Margaret Hodge was chair of the Public Accounts Committee, she was making an awful lot of noise about tax avoidance. And this was something that as a tax lawyer I knew quite a lot about. And I wanted to participate in the public debate, and all of my friends and colleagues were saying, why are you doing this? Why are you talking about tax avoidance as though it's a bad thing? You're going to blow up your own practice. And I didn't care. I'd never really been that interested in making money, and I'd slightly fallen into the practice of tax law. I kind of wanted to do something, as I perceived it, I wanted to do something useful with my life. I mean, of course, you never know, right? I mean, this is kind of one of the key messages, one of the key things I think I've learned in the last few years. You never know what's going to work and what's not going to work. So I was quite ready to blow up my tax practice. I was listening to all of my colleagues and friends saying, Jolyon, what are you doing? And I didn't care. But in fact, what happened was that 90% of the tax world hated me, but 10% of the tax world thought that I was doing really important work, that mine was a really key voice at that moment in the debate because I knew what I was talking about, and not many people who know about tax are good at communication, and few of them who are practicing tax actually want to talk about what actually happens. And so that 10% sent me lots and lots of work, and in fact that 10% kind of compensated for the fact that 90% of people hated me. And that thinking that actually you can cut across conventional wisdom, that actually no one knows what's going to happen, even if it sounds right, is pretty important. And what we now do, what I try to do, is put myself in the way of the possibility of good things happening, because I just don't think we know as much as we think we know.
Were you in Silk when you started the blog?
So I started the blog in 2013.
So a couple of years before you were in Silk.
And I took Silk in 2015.
But close to being in Silk, well established, did that give you the confidence to do what you were then doing? Is it something you couldn't have done earlier?
I mean, one of the key dynamics at the bar before you take Silk is the need to preserve the good wishes, the goodwill of your colleagues, your professional peers, judges, those who send you instructions. And that's really, really important, because all of those people need to give you references. You need to get something like 30 or 40 referees from a mixture of professional colleagues, judges, and instructing solicitors to say nice things about you. And if you start sort of pushing against power, that's quite difficult. And then Of course, once you've got silk, you're released from the obligation, or at least the good sense course, to say and do what you think is right. So definitely for me, taking silk was a really important moment. It was an important moment personally because I don't think I could have left the bar before I'd taken silk. I would have felt like a failure, and I think I had a sense that would sort of haunt me for the rest of my life. So I really needed to take silk for that reason. But it also freed me to use that privilege that I had won to do work that felt important.
When you started the blog, what was your mix of clients? It was taxpayers, tax avoidance schemes, but also HMRC as well. How was it split?
Again, nothing ever happens as you plan. I was pretty left-wing as a kid. I didn't really want to do tax avoidance work. I was desperate to do work for HMRC. I applied again and again and again for the government panels. So you apply for the sort of baby barrister scheme, and then there's a C panel and a B panel. And they said, no, no, no. And then I applied again for the A panel, and they put me on the A panel, which is the sort of the starry one. But by that stage, I think in the eyes of HMRC, I was kind of tainted. So I didn't get any instructions from HMRC. And there are only two clients, right, in the world of tax litigation. There's the taxpayer, or very often the not taxpayer, and there's the government. And if you're not acting for one, you're acting for the other.
Someone's noticed our matching shoes over there. We didn't get away with it for long. What was your motivation?
So embarrassed.
What was your motivation for writing the book?
I don't know how many people in the audience have written books. I suspect, looking around, probably quite a few. And most people's motivation for writing a book is that some clever editor has tapped the right kind of note of ego in you and said, look, yours is an important voice, Jolyon, and the world is waiting for your book. And you think, oh, well, that's probably bollocks. But it might be true, and it's a message I'm really keen to hear. And I enjoyed it. I did very much enjoy the process, at least once I'd figured out exactly what I wanted the book to be. So it's not easy writing about constitutional law in a way that's accessible, in a way that resonates with people who are not lawyers. And I have a very particular take on things. And so it's all in the first person. So even the stuff that is about how our democracy is constructed or constructed badly is told in my voice as I see it. And I'm not aware of any other books that are like that. It took me quite a long time to work out how to execute that thing, which I really knew I wanted the book to be, because I don't think facts and data and theory resonate with people quite as stories do.
So you started the blog 2013. I think the last post on it was the early 2020s, wasn't it?
Yeah.
2021 or so. Did your voice change throughout that time? Do you think you had to find your voice while writing that? It
did. I mean, it's an art, writing a blog, and it's a really interesting reaction, actually, to a world in which people have become very distrustful. If you write a newspaper column, your audience just has words on a page, and maybe they know the journalist, maybe they trust the journalist, maybe they trust the newspaper. But with a blog, in fact, you can embed documents, so you can say, here's a fact. And then you can say, but you don't need to take my word for it, just click here, and you'll be able to see the document for yourself. And working out how to use that possibility to cause people to see the world differently took me a while, but felt to me interesting and powerful and fun, actually, because I was writing about really boring stuff. I was writing about the governance of the tax system. I wrote like a 3,000-word blog on mechanics at HMRC for securing that sweetheart deals weren't done. And I found it really fascinating, and it was really quite well read. But that takes a form. You have to learn how to speak to people who should be interested in what you want to write about, but are not given by writers a way into it.
In the book, you talk about successes and failures, and you give your percentages or your numbers. You say that you've had 45 wins with the Good Law Project, 35 losses, and 20 somewhere in the middle. Maybe we'll come to what the sum in the middle mean, but which is your greatest success?
It's really difficult, actually, knowing what a success is and what a failure is, indeed. I think this is to my theme again about everything being uncertain. And everyone who's done any campaigning will know that attributing causality, I campaigned on this thing happened, therefore it was my campaign that caused that thing to happen, is really difficult, really problematic. It's, usually impossible. So when you're putting up your table of things that you think you've done that have been successes, who's going to audit that, right? Who's going to scrutinize it? I don't feel comfortable with that as a lawyer. I like to be able to, give my working, show people how we got to where we got to. But the biggest legal success was an extraordinary case where so very early on in the Brexit story, in 2016 even, I was writing on the blog in October or November about how it was pretty clear to me that whether or not Gina Miller won her case about Parliament needing to trigger Article 50 rather than the executive, Parliament was going to trigger Article 50. So the outcome of that case didn't really matter. But I foresaw the possibility that over the course of Brexit negotiations, Parliament might feel differently. And I wanted to open a door that most people believe to be locked. So I don't know if anyone remembers the Gina Miller case, but there was this metaphor of firing a gun. And you fire the gun, the bullet leaves the chamber and cannot be returned. So the very fact of, and this was the legal argument actually, the very fact of Article 50 being irrevocable meant that Brexit was bound to happen, and Brexit would remove our rights, for example, to live and work in the EU. And that was the orthodoxy. Government accepted it. The Supreme Court found it. And the claimants, including Gina Miller, were arguing for it. But it didn't seem to me to be right, or at least not clearly right. And so in 2016, we began the case to prove that Article 50 was revocable, that we could just change our minds like that and decide to stay, because I wanted to open that door at the end of the corridor. I wanted, when Parliament came to think about the Brexit deal, for it to have that option on the table. And it took 13 hearings in Scotland before we could persuade a Scottish court to ask, the only court that could answer that question, which is the Court of Justice in Luxembourg, to ask the question. Government, which had not taken the case very seriously, all of a sudden panicked, and they put 5 Queen's Counsel then, on trying to block the reference. They asked the Supreme Court for permission. The Supreme Court said no. We then went to Luxembourg for a hearing, and the EU Council was against us, and the EU Commission was against us, and most of the member states had briefed that we were wrong and that this would be disastrous for the European Union. And we won. And it was I mean, it's quite an extraordinary moment, actually. I remember going into the court and, like 32 judges in the Grand Chamber, all file in, one judge from each of the member states of the EU. I think 32 is the right number. And all of a sudden it occurred to me that this thing that I'd been doing, kind of sitting at my computer, actually had real world consequences. All of those people had come to the court because of what I'd done. And we succeeded. So that was an extraordinary legal victory. But in fact, as we all now know, it didn't make any difference. And the biggest actual success, I think, has been the work we've done in the pandemic.
Is that the biggest success for making a difference?
For making a difference, that's right. So there was this moment at the end of 2021, so November 2021, where we had got judgment in a case about whether Dominic Cummings and Michael Gove had unlawfully given contracts to their friends. The court at that stage had said, yes, this contract award was unlawful. So we'd won that case and no one cared. But a case that we were arguing where we didn't have a result, that the VIP lane was unlawful, didn't have judgment yet, the court hadn't yet heard the case, but we had completely changed the public narrative. So everyone was rightly animated about the absolute scandal that was the institutionalization of political preferences to award these enormous, £250 million contracts to friends of the Conservative Party. We changed the narrative before we even got into court. And when you come back to your question, which is, what do the numbers on that table mean? Legal successes, campaigning successes. It's the biggest success was a campaigning success. Yes. As it happened, we went on to win, but it wouldn't have mattered if we'd lost, right? We'd already changed the public narrative.
So let's move on to talk about publicity and its importance. I think there are two angles we can look at it from. The first, publicity is a tool for change in itself. So the work on the project was enough to bring about some change. It changed the public discourse. Is that one of your aims as part of the GLP? So
public interest litigation in the UK is quite new. It's been around in the States for a long, long time. And in the States, public interest litigation is a very potent instrument, right? Because the presence in the United States legal system of a higher law, the Constitution, means that if the government of the day does something that is contrary to the Constitution, passes legislation, you can strike down that legislation. And there's a sort of a lengthy legal discourse in the US about what happens when liberal lawyers meet liberal judges and they strike down legislation in a way that leaves the electorate far behind, that actually lacks popular consent, and how damaging that is to democracy. In the UK, the law is a pretty impotent thing. So in that case about the VIP lane, the height of our ambition was that a judge would declare the VIP lane unlawful. But what would that matter? So because the law in the UK usually looked at through a legal lens is a puny thing, you have to go to where the power lies, and the power lies rightly with people. It lies with the demos. We are a democracy, and you can use the law to address some of the failings of journalism. Let me be really clear, right? Sitting here, the failings of journalism sometimes are attributable to journalism, but sometimes they're attributable to who owns journalism and how politicians have ceased to care enough about the duty they owe to the public to be accountable to the public.
So in the context of the Uber litigation, I think we can probably see a part of page 223 on the screen talking about keeping the show on the road. I'll start reading it while it hopefully appears. But you say in your book, if we could keep the show on the road, there we go, long enough and generate enough publicity, we might just tilt the scales in favour of HMRC doing the right thing. Even if you lose the litigation, do you think there's a benefit to that? Does the publicity help?
So the Uber case was about the fact that for reasons that we haven't uncovered, Uber was for a long, long time given a real sweetheart deal. And I mean, only last year, HMRC at last assessed Uber to 635 million quid. And we brought a case asking them to assess Uber to a larger sum. I can't claim causation. I can say that there is that correlation of time and event. And our strategy there, so this was when Good Law Project was very young. It was in 2017. It was the first case we took. There literally was just me and my rather battered Sony Ericsson. No money, no infrastructure. But I thought to myself, it would be a catastrophe for HMRC, for a judge to decide that it had left this vast sum of money lying on the pavement. I thought that if I could keep the case going for long enough, generate enough reporting, and the Financial Times, I remember covering the case enthusiastically, repeatedly. The political pressure on HMRC, the fear in HMRC that a judge might find that it had not done its job to the tune of £1 billion would cause it to do what it was clear to me was the right thing and assess HMRC. I mean, obviously you hope that you're going to win, but it was quite a difficult case.
You're obviously a very experienced lawyer. You work with the GLP instructing experienced counsel. Would you ever use crowd-funded money going into litigation knowing that you were going to lose, or think you're very likely you were going to lose because you want publicity, because you want to draw focus to a particular cause? Is there a separate aim?
You can't ever really know what the outcome of a case is going to be. You get advice from the best people, and if you're sensible, you interrogate that advice and you do what they say, or at least you act on the basis of it.
If the advice is 30% prospects of success, lawyers never say lower than 30, there's always that litigation risk. Would you still go ahead thinking we're going to go down in flames? Probably, but it will help nonetheless.
So I promise you I'll answer the question. But importantly, we could choose cases that we won. We could fight nothing but winning cases. And that would have very, very little impact. It would be nice for my ego. It would it would muzzle our critics who say we lose too much. But it wouldn't achieve impact. And I'm not here for my ego. I'm here for the impact. So absolutely, we take cases that are difficult. We do so knowingly. Sometimes we take cases that have a less than 50-50 prospect of succeeding because we think that the possibility of winning, that what winning will mean is really, really important, or we think that people need this issue to be ventilated. The question you're putting to me is a slightly sharper version of the question that I've answered. The question you're putting to me is the law just a vehicle that you can ride for publicity?
Well, there's a transparency question in there too, though, because you're crowdfunding. it would be ridiculous as a litigator to publicly say before the litigation, we reckon we're going to lose this. You're not going to say that to the other side. So you crowdfund, telling the crowd that you've got good prospects or it's worth funding. But privately, you know you might have poor prospects. Is there a transparency issue?
No. We don't do that. We do, in our crowdfunders, sometimes say, this is a really difficult case. And I'm pretty sure, I can't think of an example now, I'm pretty sure that I've said it's likely we will lose this case. And I disagree with you. Judges don't care what I say about our prospects. They're not persuaded to decide in my favour when I say we're going to win, and nor are they persuaded to decide in my opponent's favour if I say I'm going to lose. They ought to decide the case based on the arguments that are before them. But I do want to come back to your question. We would not take a case that we did not think had sensible prospects of succeeding, and whether the number's 30 or whatever it is, I'm not going to take a case unless I think there is a realistic, a sensible prospect of the case succeeding. We will sometimes take cases where those prospects are below 50, because I don't think that there's anything magical about a lawyer's assessment of the case falling on the right side of a coin toss.
Not here for the ego, here for the impact, you said. In your book, you describe as an indication of the effectiveness of your work the fact that you personally have been the target of verbal attacks by the Prime Minister, the Home Secretary, the Foreign Secretary. I don't think we can get this one on the screen, but you write, there's no greater compliment that you can be paid by the power that you challenge than to force it to speak your name, to breathe into your lungs the air of power, of saliency. When those who hold power are forced to attack you repeatedly, it's because they know you are damaging them and they can no longer ignore what you're saying and what people are hearing. I want to ask you about the extent to which you see the value in the self-promotion of the Jolyon brand. You're a brand in yourself.
I am a brand in myself, and that carries advantages and disadvantages for Good Law Project. Those, if there are any in the audience, who are close Good Law Project watchers, will see that actually increasingly we put forward spokespeople who are not me, because we're cognizant of, apart from anything else, I've spent the last 6 years of my life building this thing. I want it to outlive me. I want it to outlive my interest in it. I want it to sustain. And if you take risks, like I take risks, then there is damage. There is a high possibility of harm if there's that over reliance on a single figure. So just in sustainability terms, we're very, very keen that we have other spokespeople and we're developing those. Remember those numbers you had at the start, right? It was only in 2020 that we took on our first employee. We feel like we've been around for a long, long time, but we now have a number of people. We're putting forward lots and lots of spokespeople. I do very little media, and that's quite deliberate. But being a hate figure for the right is also powerful.
Is all publicity good publicity?
No, but some publicity is. Well, so I signed a lawyer's declaration about the climate emergency a couple of weeks ago, and the Daily Mail carried 4 full pages, one of them a front page, on 4 days, much of which attacked me personally. Now, if I can make my peace with that, it's powerful, right? Because I get to communicate our messages about climate change to an audience that would not otherwise read them. So the sacrifice is my dignity or the hatred of very, very substantial parts of the country. But the gain is that an audience that does not want messaging about the damage that the climate catastrophe is causing nevertheless gets that message. So it is powerful being a hate figure, and it's not for me to judge whether I use that power in ways that are constructive or good. That's for others to form a view on. But I'm not going to absorb the narrative of my enemies and say that it's wrong for me to do that because it's egotistical, or it's wrong for me to sign the declaration because it's symbolic. Not that those attacks are not painful, depending on who they come from. Sometimes they are painful, but because it absorbs the language of my opponents and it makes me and us and our messaging less effective, and that's what I'm about.
You said that you try not to do a huge amount of media, so I'm going to embarrass you slightly by quoting from an interview with James O'Brien, which is a podcast, full disclosure, September 2021. In fact, these are the opening words you say on the podcast. You say, "The funny thing about social media is it allows you to present a picture of yourself to the world, one that cannot be interrogated by your Twitter followers, and you get very carefully to curate that picture. But real life has a habit of sometimes exploding your magnificent act of self-curation." Do we see the truth of you on Twitter?
No, I mean, but.
Do we see what you think will get followers for the GLP and will allow you to progress that cause?
You see, it's a limited medium, right? It's not like real life. That's why those of you who follow me on Twitter have come here to see me, to see the whites of my eyes, hear the tone of my voice, listen to me, talk to you. It's a powerful medium to reach lots of people, but it's limited. And of course, there is an element to it, which is performance. And I'm very mindful, actually, of the inauthenticity of Twitter. And that was what I was acknowledging, tongue-in-cheek, to James O'Brien. But when you try and let people into your lives by telling jokes at your own expense, it can go spectacularly wrong.
You've got a bit of a reputation that I'm sure you know about amongst legal Twitter for blocking your critics. Do you think that's a fair observation, first of all? Do you have that reputation?
Well, those are two different questions.
Well,
is it a fair observation, and do I have that reputation? I do have that reputation. It's not a fair observation. And the difference is, I don't block my critics. I block people who are angry or abusive. If you look at the debate around the climate emergency declaration, I have some very long discussions with a very fierce adherent to the cab rank rule, a man called Greg Callis, a very, very fine barrister.
What is the cab rank rule for those who don't know?
So the cab rank rule says that barristers, like cabbies, have to accept who's ever at the front of the queue when they get to the top of the rank. The difference is that cabbies have to take you to your destination with a fare set by government, but barristers can say, "I'll act for your case, but only if you pay the higher fee that I want to charge you because I don't like you very much." That's the reality of the cab rank rule.
But the rule in its purest sense is if the fee is reasonable and you're competent to do it, you should do it.
Well, in its purest sense, yes, and it's a rule that expresses a really beautiful idea about access to justice.
As you wrote in The Guardian quite recently.
As I wrote in The Guardian. And I was thinking of Greg Callis when I wrote that paragraph. I was thinking, here is a man who I admire and respect, a friend, somebody I have called up and said to him, look, I've got somebody who needs legal representation. I know your politics. I know you will not like this person, but you are very skilled and you will do a very good job for them. They cannot pay you. Will you act for them anyway? And Greg says yes, and he says yes because he's a believer in the cab rank rule. So when I do this stuff, at least when I do it well, and I don't always do it well, but when I do the stuff and I do it well, I have in mind what the adherence to the cab rank rule would say about my stance. But the thing is, there is no unifying theory of morality that can guide us through all of the thickets that as sentient humans in a complicated world with conflicting moral demands on us. We have to think for ourselves. And the thing about the cab rank rule is that it means that solicitors who act for new fossil fuel infrastructure projects get scrutinised, and bankers who fund new fossil fuel infrastructure projects get scrutinised, but barristers who act on new fossil fuel projects are shielded from criticism. And I think that is an important truth that we must also not lose sight of. The cab rank rule is a beautiful idea, but sometimes is self-serving.
And you've pledged not to do any work for companies pursuing new fossil fuel projects.
Yes.
But also not to prosecute any people who are charged with protesting in relation to the fuel crisis.
Yes.
Why did you, particularly the second bit I suppose I'm interested in, you're not going to prosecute anybody. Why did you pledge that? When was the last time you prosecuted anybody is the obvious question.
I've never prosecuted anyone, but I'm not black. And I walk in Black Lives Matters marches. I'm not gay and I go on pride marches. I do lots of things because I think it's symbolically important that I lend my privilege as a wealthy father of three who's white, who's well-spoken, who's heard by audiences that those people are not heard by, that I use my privilege to advance those things that I believe in. I don't think I can leave those fights to them. I think despite the fact that my presence there is symbolic, it's important nevertheless that I go. And here, there were lots and lots of junior signatories who are those barristers in the early stage of their practices who could not easily take the risk of infuriating the judges and their professional colleagues because they hadn't yet taken silk. And I had taken silk and I wanted to provide cover. And of course I knew that the fire would be directed at me. A bit like Jose Mourinho at Chelsea, he used to attract all of the flack to create space for his playing squad.
Of course, it's one thing for a criminal silk who probably won't prosecute a protester because they're more often in the Court of Appeal than in the Magistrates' Court to sign this pledge. Isn't it very different for a tax lawyer who doesn't accept any new cases anyway to sign such a pledge? There's one bit of your book we can get on the screen. You say the law is not a parlour game for performing intellectuals. It must matter, we must make it matter. But aren't you performing? You're doing something symbolic.
No. Symbolism is important, it matters, and I've articulated in part why. And of course, the objection, you will make my life as a criminal lawyer more difficult, is also symbolic. There is no evidence that me signing that declaration has made more difficult the job of any barrister. They feel that it might, and I understand why they feel that it might, but there's no evidence that it has, and there's no evidence that it will. And the reality of life is that there is not one golden path through the moral thicket that confronts us as sentient human beings. We have to find it for ourselves. We have to be thoughtful. We cannot rest on fable.
More media, I'm afraid. The Byline Times, June 2021, a podcast as well, you say, because although as a barrister you act for all sorts of people you don't like, and it's important that you do, that's why we have the cab rank rule. You're nevertheless entitled to have your personal views as well. But aren't you now letting your personal views override your professional views?
You're continuing to stumble at the same hurdle. You're putting to me that that I'm a hypocrite because I've relied on the cab rank rule. I don't say the cab rank rule is unimportant. I don't say that it's wrong. I just say that it is one value that has to be weighed against other values. And the more the debate plays out, I don't know if anyone saw, but yesterday the Law Society came out and it said, solicitors do not need to act on new fossil fuel projects. And what that means in the real world, again, I can't claim causation, I can just claim correlation. What that means in the real world is that when solicitors, who are the midwives of the birth of these things that are destroying the planet, act, we can criticize them for doing it. We can say to them, you guys are doing a really, really, really bad thing. We can put pressure on them not to do it. And that will generate an increase in the cost attached to bringing new fossil fuel projects into existence. It will bring fewer of them into existence. That is a really, really, really important outcome. And respectfully, the ethical niceties of a small professional class are important, and I'm a barrister and I believe in the cab rank rule, but they are not some trump card that enables you to ignore environmental destruction. I just don't accept it.
Before the 2015 election, you'd heard murmurings that you might have a job in a Labour number 10 running tax policy, or even as an Attorney General from the Lords. Two questions, I think, flowing from that. I'll ask them at the same time. What does the future hold for you personally under a Labour government? But what does the future hold for the GLP under a Labour government? Would you still hold that government to account in the same way you do this government?
So I'm not a member of the Labour Party. I haven't been since 2016. I am much more critical of the Conservative Party than I am of the Labour Party, although I am critical of the Labour Party. And we're about holding power to account, right? We can't hold not power to account. The Conservative Party can do that job perfectly well. So I'm not expecting to be offered any jobs in the Labour Party. I'm not an advisor to the Labour Party. I don't talk to the Labour Party very often. I don't never talk to them, but I also have Conservative ministers who I talk to. We have a really interesting dilemma, actually, in the event of a Labour government, because we will be very, very powerful because we will be a very, very effective critic, coming as we do from the progressive part of the political spectrum of a Labour government. And we will be taken up with some enthusiasm, and I know this for a fact, by the right-wing press. So when I was critical of Ed Miliband's tax policy in 2014, I got acres and acres of newsprint in the right-wing press to make those points. And when I was critical of Corbyn's policy on the EU, again, the Telegraph and the Mail were very, very keen to give me space to express my views. So if you imagine a world in 2025 where Keir Starmer is sitting in number 10, we will be a very, very powerful critic. And we will be a critic. We are about holding power to account. You know this as a lawyer. I beg your pardon?
Truth above personal views.
Lawyers are quite boring fundamentally, right? We have some cultural values that are deeper than the cab rank rule, I would say, and those cultural values are about the importance of what we call even more boringly governance. So it's about good decisions coming from power and challenge, from creative tension. So French constitutionalists talk about the separation of powers, and from those coming together of forces, good decisions emerge. And one of the problems, I think, probably the defining problem of this Conservative government has been a lack of adequate challenge. But we are about power getting things wrong, getting away with stuff because institutions have become enfeebled. And if Labour follows in the footsteps of the Conservative Party and does not seek to restore these important institutions to full vigour, there will be lots and lots and lots of work for us to do. We will lose a lot of supporters who we cannot cause to understand that we are about that really boring lawyer's notion of governance. And I don't know what that will look like, but I'm very confident that I will be a hero in the Mail every time I criticise the Labour Party. It's a slight, you can imagine this kind of exploding head emoji.
We've got just a few minutes. I'm going to try and squeeze in a last topic with another quotation on the screen. We recognise an obligation to be transparent about why we do what we do. We value the accountability that comes with transparency. We believe it sharpens our thinking and it makes us better. Going from there to winning and losing. A well-trodden example of this is when you were widely accused as having mischaracterised a judgment. It's the February 2022 judgment, about which you tweeted that Boris Johnson and Matt Hancock broke the law because they didn't think about disabled and ethnic minority communities in appointing Dido Harding. You went on to then tweet, when your critics said that the position was inappropriate because in fact you lost the case, you said our comms yesterday were basically right. Basically right, I think, includes a bit of a concession that you weren't right, that you were wrong. Do you think you've learned from that, and has that changed your communications with the public?
So what happened in that case was that we brought a case alongside the Runnymede Trust about the practice of the government of appointing its friends to senior positions in government. And those friends, because the government was then overwhelmingly white and privileged, were also white and privileged. And what the court found was that we won, the case succeeded in that government had not had due regard to its duty to improve representation of black people in government and disabled people in government, but that Good Law Project did not have standing to bring that case. So there was no difference between our case and Runnymede case. We paid Runnymede legal expenses because they were our legal expenses, and we bore Runnymede costs because they were our costs. And we could have wittingly claimed to have won that case because the case that we had funded had succeeded. We decided not to make that claim. That was the decision that I took. But this was September 21, did you say?
Feb 22.
Feb 22. So we had a junior comms person who changed the headline on the email to "We have won." I didn't know this until people started asking me about it on Twitter. And as soon as I discovered it, as soon as I became aware of it, I immediately said we shouldn't have said that. I can't remember exactly what I said, but I'm pretty sure I would have apologised. That's my practice. The reality is that in an organisation, particularly in a fast-growing organisation under enormous political pressure, with lots of junior staff who are not really battle-hardened, mistakes get made. And it tells you nothing at all about my ethics or our transparency. It just says that mistakes are inevitable.
But where
what does tell you about our ethics and transparency is that as soon as it came to our attention, we put our hand up.
But where you're in the business of publicity to fund what you do and keep what you do on the road, keep the show on the road, isn't there always going to be a bit of a tension between perfect accuracy at one end and ideal marketing at the other end? Do you need to find yourself somewhere on that spectrum?
You totally have to wrestle with that question. But look, we are best in class when it comes to crowd-funded litigation. Nobody else, as a matter of invariable routine, publishes everything they're able to publish. So I also tell in the book of the events of the 26th of June 2016, so several days after the Brexit referendum. We commissioned a bunch of lawyers. This was my first ever piece of crowdfunding. We asked for £10,000 and we capped the maximum donation that anyone could give, because I did not want it to be able to be said that we were funded by deep-pocketed individuals. We capped at £100. Nobody has ever done that before. Crowd Justice platform were tearing their hair out that I said we won't raise the money with you unless you introduce this cap. And the lawyers said to us, don't publish the letter we're sending to the government, because if you publish it, all of the other people who want to bring this case will steal all of our reasoning and use it. And I said, if we want if we want to win the trust of our supporters and we want to build that supporter base, we have to be transparent. And actually, it doesn't really matter who wins the case. What matters is that the case is won. I mean, this is Harry Truman, right? There's no end to what you can accomplish if you don't care who gets the credit. You have to trust whatever your critics say, who will leap with great glee on every mistake that you make, and we make mistakes, it's inevitable. You have to trust that the communication of your values and the performance of your values in your work will carry you with your supporters. Otherwise, you find yourself in all sorts of ethical deep waters.
Joe, thank you. I don't think barristers are known for the accuracy of their time estimates, but we better stop there. Thank you very much.
Thanks for watching that video. If you enjoyed that, we think you'll love these. And if you want to join us for the next live recording of Tortoise Lates, head to tortoisemedia.com/book.